In addition, we're seeing competition among Shia parties, particularly among Prime Minister Maliki and his Dawa party, and the party whom we abbreviate severally right now as ISKI, the Supreme Council, as it refers to itself within Iraq, and they are competing for the votes of Shia throughout Baghdad and throughout the south. The rivalry, I think, has been sharpened by Prime Minister Maliki's growing strength in the light of the operations he's conducted against the militia groups in Baghdad and in Basra, and that has really paved the way for these two parties to dominate the Shia vote within the upcoming provincial elections. And the competition is fierce. We can see Prime Minister Maliki bidding for essentially the ability to provide services to people in Sadr City, in Basra, and throughout the south as a way of strengthening his political hand. We also see almost everywhere we go the posters of ISKI and its religious figures competing with Maliki's so-called secular Dawa party. In addition, we have a limited degree of flux and change within the Office of the Martyr Sadr and the Sadrist trend as their parliamentary leaders essentially split themselves from the militia leaders and really try to find their way to some sort of safe haven so that they can continue to participate in national politics, even though the Sadrist organization as a whole has been so gravely troubled by and quite frankly almost defeated by the recent operations. And so we see a little bit of a power struggle within the Sadrist trend. Those parliamentarians who now exist are facing up to the fact that they really don't have a place to be in a political infrastructure that supports them fully. And so they are in flux in a set of interesting debates amongst themselves, generated not least by the fact that the government of Iraq has determined that parties that have militias are not permitted to run in elections, and therefore really they have caused a degree of separation among these parties. The OMS cannot associate itself as closely with the militias, nor can the Sadrist trend parliamentarians associate itself with the militias, and we have a competition or a struggle within that party. We have a great deal of friction as well generated by the Kurdish parties. I think we saw that quite clearly yesterday as our good friend Talabani decided that he would veto the provincial elections legislation because it did not contain wording that suited him and the interests of the Kurdish regional government. And finally, in addition, we see the proliferation of secular political parties and lots of independents, so that there are now 502, yes, that's right, 502 political parties that will be competing in the upcoming provincial elections. What does this mean, and why does it matter? First and foremost, it tells you that there is a vibrant Iraqi political life and that there is perhaps not only the political progress that we've seen in the passing of the benchmark legislation, but also a new and vibrant kind of discussion, really quite rambunctious, not neat, completely messy, quite vigorous, and we do not actually know right now what the parameters of Iraqi politics are going to look like this time next year. And so as we talk about Iraqi politics, we have to understand that those politics are in flux. The terms of the discussion are now being set, and all of the politicians and the political parties are finding their space in the political spectrum and the way in which they will function and compete with other political parties. And so the rhetoric that we hear from Iraq's political parties is different from what we heard before and is unusual to us, the United States, whether we hear it through the newspapers or whether our general officers or State Department folks or ambassador sees it on the ground and has to wrestle with the fact that suddenly there's a new dynamic. Whereas last year there were essentially 3 moving parts in the Iraqi political system and they didn't really move at all. Now all of a sudden we have many moving parts and it's very hard to figure out how to balance their interests with ours and how we, the United States, should engage in this new, highly political discussion within Iraq. The second thing I would tell you is that this political competition is why Iraq's provincial elections that will, one hopes, be held sometime at the end of this year or the very beginning of next year is so important. On the one hand, the provincial elections are a way to enfranchise those who did not vote in the elections last time, particularly the Sunni population, but they are also a way of resolving some of the differences in the competition among all of these different fascist groups, and also paving the way for the national elections that will take place in 2009. I think we've learned from past experience that our elections in Iraq are not necessarily the end of a political process, but rather the beginning. And so as we head into these provincial elections, we have to make sure that we don't see them as simply the culmination of the surge and the new Iraqi political process, but as the start of whatever Iraqi politics will look like next. And that is why I think we've started to hear from some of our commanders on the ground that force levels in Iraq really must stay where they are through Iraq's provincial elections, not simply to secure the elections, but also to mitigate the fact that those elections will generate competition among political parties and possibly a great deal of friction when their outcomes are known. Because I don't actually think that free and fair elections will necessarily determine one party is the winner in this struggle, but rather set the conditions for provincial elections coming up again in 2012. And so there is a risk that we have in these provincial elections that they will, on the one hand, cause some content among groups that had not been enfranchised before, but also may provoke a violent response from those groups that do not receive what they expect. And therefore, it is very much in our interests, the interests of the United States and the interests of Iraq, to preserve stability through and possibly beyond the provincial elections. I will conclude there and turn this over to Fred.